Welcome back. Quick video for you. This is actually a video response to a question that I received from a longtime subscriber, someone who's been following the channel for quite some time, reached out to me and asked for an update on the table conventions that we're using. Some people call these social contracts. I'm not a huge lover of that particular term because the social contract by definition is something that isn't written, it's just understood. And this is an explicit document. It goes through what the expectations are. These we use in our games, even when we have, returning players. So this is, we go over these every time we start a new game. We go over it as part of a session 0. It's a discussion that we have with all participants. It's not a top-down dictatorial, you will do this, you will not do that. We talk about every item. And like I mentioned, a gentleman reached out to me and said, do you have an update on that? So I thought I would just share it in case anyone else out there would be interested. This is what we use. So here it is. This is for an online game that myself and a few others are playing in. And this is a weekly game, although we've been on a bit of a hiatus. We hope to correct that starting this week. You'll notice here, because it's an online game, we have some connectivity conventions. I'm going to skip over that because that may not be applicable for all of you, and you can just see what it is. Basic, like you have to have a video and a stable internet connection as much as possible. Dice conventions as well. I'm going to skip over that too. Other than to say that I think it's important to specify we're going to be playing. If you were using house rules, for example. Then you would make it, I would suggest this would be a good place to put it in. Hey, we're going to be using these rules, but with some house rules, and then you give those house rules to everybody so everyone's on the same page and there's not nasty surprises like, oh no, you can't do that. We've already house ruled that. I don't like gotcha style games where really that information should be in the player's hands from the get-go. This is, I think, where the commenter was focused more, is the in-character conventions, because we do things a little differently in our games than is I would say the norm. So let's just go through this. We're very explicit about it. It's an in-character game session, so that means no out-of-character talking. Now that for those that have watched a few of our games, they can see what we mean by that. If there was someone brand new, then I would have to provide some examples. That is part of the advantage of having a session 0 or some kind of pre-session where we go through and just practice it together. So this is what we mean. This would be considered out of character. This is not out of character. How would you get this information? Provide some examples. And right underneath that, so if can I highlight this? I bet I can highlight this. Let me just check. Oh yeah, sure I can. So here, if we look at this, right there. This is really important for us. In our games, we make this explicit that the game master will not be moving the player characters. And for me, so the second part of this, so I'll just delete this. The second part is really just a me thing, although some of the others in our little circle of role players do the same thing. I try to avoid saying you as much as I can, especially as it pertains to narration of character actions. I just don't want to get into the habit of puppeteering player characters. I'd rather not do that. I've done it for many years, and I'm trying to break the habit. So I avoid the speaking in the second person as much as I can. It's not completely avoidable, and there's some instances where it's not as onerous as others to use it. Here is something that's a little different, and I think this is the crux of where the question was coming from. In the online game that we run on Monday nights, the game master narrates failed skill checks, and the players will narrate their successes. Now, you may be asking yourself, why is that? What is the thinking that goes behind that? And it's different for every group, because my in-person group, this is exactly opposite. My in-person group much prefers to describe their failures, and I just decide their successes, or I describe their successes. The dice decides if they succeed or fail. You may be asking yourself, well, why is that? Well, I'll give you the rationale for the in-person group. They love having control over the failures, because they I don't know why they're like this way. I think it's awesome. They think it's exceptionally interesting to introduce complications for themselves. So they're always like, for example, someone decided that they failed in a check, a survival type check, and they got frostbite, and so they decide that they've lost a few digits, and or one of them. There's always stuff like that. Like they are much more brutal than I would be in most cases, but it's what they've decided, because they like to have that input on the failed check, especially on critical failures, and they don't want to transgress the success by adding too much success. So they prefer that the success is the domain of the game master. I will describe what the good outcome is. But in my online game, the players describe their good outcomes. And I think that might be because the players that we have in our online game are much more comfortable with the co-creation elements. And we've played in this style long enough that we trust one another not to be cheesy about what they're co-creating. Like, oh, all of a sudden I have the exact thing I need all the time. We don't see that a lot. Perhaps once my in-person group comes more comfortable with creating things, they'll be more comfortable describing their successes without worrying too much about going too far with that. Oh, it's too much. So that's important. As you can see, it's right here. We put that in black and white. Also in black and white is the expectation that player turns are brief. We like short turns, generally speaking. Short turns are better. Now, not every turn is going to have all of these elements. If you're having a conversation back and forth, for example, you may not state the attempted action. You may not include a location at every time if it's just dialogue, natural dialogue back and forth between two characters, in character, of course. However, because we want to avoid things such as floating head syndrome, where everyone's just talking and no one knows where anyone is and it's not clear, we do try to include this information about location or anchor somehow into the world, even if it is during a dialogue situation. So a player may describe their character lighting a pipe or adjusting an article of clothing or pulling out a chair and sitting down in the middle of a conversation, so that it still anchors where the characters are in the world that we're all trying to imagine. We prefer first person. Sorry, I jumped there. I didn't mean to. Rather than third person. Part of that is because of what we found is when we all are trying to stay in character, speaking in third person doesn't quite do it, especially if let's say two of us are in first person and the third player is in third person, then it's a little jarring. It doesn't work as well. And it can lead to instances of confusion, whereas are you speaking or is the character speaking? If we're all in first person all the time, then we take away some of that ambiguity with the understanding right from the onset that if you're speaking as your character. Are you speaking out loud? Yes, you're speaking out loud unless you're describing the character's location or action that they're attempting. Character dialogue is consistent with game setting. People will be like, what do you mean? Oh, are you one of those thee, thou, thine people for... No, that's not what that means. What this is trying to address is situations where a colloquial expression or an idiomatic expression that is common in modern parlance would be completely out of place in a fantasy setting or something like that. If we're playing in a medieval or let's say a Bronze Age game, and you sound like you're speaking to a close friend on the basketball court or something like that, where you're trash talking, and I find it a little jarring. So we just say, look, respect the setting overall. You don't have to change or have a language, speaking like Old English or something like that. No. But I think that it's clear that if Knights of the Round Table or something like that, then you wouldn't sound like you were hanging out with buddies watching the football game. The language doesn't have to change that much. It's just the modern expressions. Perhaps a good example of this is if you were if they were frustrated with an NPC interaction, they probably wouldn't call that NPC dude or something like that. It would be a little jarring. So we try to avoid that. Player etiquette I'll skip over, but it's just I think it's important if you're going to allow character versus character, then everyone should know that and agree with it before it takes place. Otherwise, you may have an awkward situation. We also put in there that we try to avoid interrupting others. Again, that's mostly for me. It's not really a problem with everyone else, but it can be a problem for me. Co-creation is a big part of our style of play. We do try to put some parameters on that before the game starts. So what is co-creation? What is allowed for co-creation? Are you able to create NPCs on the fly? Are you able to create locations on the fly, or just items within a location? We talk about that. We put it in the session 0. We'll also put it into this document, our table conventions. We'll mention things like item scarcity and what is why are you co-creating something? Is it just to increase the resolution of the game at that moment, or are you trying to win the scenario? It's not intended to be a win state. So just getting into the character's headspace and being in character for that hour and a half to 2 hours, that's the reward. It's not the treasure at the end if your character dies, but you felt like you were there for that moment. That's reward enough, at least for us. I control all the NPCs. We make that clear. And I can alter anything that a player character introduces. For example, if it makes sense for the adventurer to have rope in their bag and they reach in and grab the rope, well, maybe there was some critter that got in and gnawed on the rope, and I'll describe that if I've messed with something that a player character has introduced, then I'll describe that so that it's not not looking for gotcha moments, just trying to make it feel like the world is real, and it doesn't feel as real if you walk in and, there, just laying on the table is exactly what I need. Isn't that convenient? And it's the third time it's happened this game session. It doesn't really work for me. So we talk about that. These other conventions is kind of a miscellaneous thing. I don't know if this will be of any use to you, but I am not interested in some exceptionally kinky or sexual scene. We do have mature themes that'll come up from time to time. That's normal. Again, we're trying to simulate a world. The world should feel real. If there's a romantic interest or something like that, and it's moving in that more of an intimate direction, then we'll fade to black. We'll come out of it. We're not going to sit around the table and role play through that. And I like to give some touch points as to what is the world like, or the tone of the game. Is this a game that's going to be more like Star Wars, or is it more like, or as I have written here, Chronicles of Riddick or Firefly? Is it more like that, or is it more Buck Rogers? What is it like? And that's not to say that we're trying to duplicate that. No, that's just the tone aspect. So is this more Lord of the Rings, or is it more Game of Thrones? Both could be considered fantasy. The tone is much different. I also put in here the expectation for how long a game session will be and what happens if your character dies. Now, this is an online game, so you'll notice here we just have this stated that if a player character dies in the middle of a session or some point in the session, then just turn off your camera for that from the rest of that session and stick around, because we still want to talk afterwards how the game went. And we'll have a new character, or you can introduce a new character, hopefully the very next session. But we don't do that in the middle of a session. I've seen that pretty common, like, oh no, my guy died. Well, I got this other guy. He's just in the boat. Let me just grab him. We don't do that. That's just that's how we do it. I hope this has been of use to you. Again, responding to a longtime viewer that had asked for this. Maybe someone else out there will find it of some use. This is what we're using in a current game. Not the same as, because we'll have multiple games going. Each one will have a slightly different document. It's a discussion. That's the intent. It's not as I mentioned at the onset, it's not some written in stone. I've seen people talking about some list, some tyrant style game master or dungeon master said, these are the 40 some odd things that you have to do or you're not in my game. No. This is a friendly document. It's not intended to be a nasty thing or a way to just exercise control. I dominate this table and this is how it must be. As I've mentioned, my in-person group, it's slightly different than this. It's not quite the same, but it works for that group. Again, thanks for watching. I hope this helps. And again, my longtime viewer that asked for this, I hope this is what you were looking for. All right, catch you on the next one.